Hello, my name is Jacob Langston. I'm a DNP anesthesia student in the College of Nursing at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. Welcome to my presentation. We are going to analyze Dexcom Clarity. It is an application for diabetic patients. So what is Dexcom Clarity? It's an extension of the Dexcom continuous glucose management device. Clarity allows diabetics to transform data from their CGM into meaningful insights that facilitate a more proactive and personalized healthcare management. This data can be seamlessly shared with your provider, and access to these trends allow patients and the provider to work together to form diabetes management plans and fill in the gaps in their care as they become apparent. Actor et al. Had highlighted a broader potential for the application, particularly in pediatric diabetes care. It provides a user-friendly interface that empowers parents to be engaged with managing their child's diabetes. The app is free as an extension of Dexcom, but the device is something you do have to pay for. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I use Dexcom. I've been aware of Dexcom Clarity, but I hadn't utilized it in the past, so this was a little bit new for me. How does it work? First, we need to understand what a CGM is. It is a continuous glucose monitor. It's subcutaneously injected and measures your glucose levels every few minutes throughout the day. Clarity is an extension of that extrapolates the data and makes reports that you can look at. It's fairly simple to use. The patient can either connect their Dexcom receiver to a computer, or if it's connected to their phone by Bluetooth, they can just download the app and then download the reports from the app. From the main page, you just choose a range of data you want to look at. For this presentation, we're going to look at 90-day range, but you can alter that and look at it from week to week or go back in the past. Providers will often download the patient's data. That way they can discuss trends and make observations when they see issues and see what the patient thinks was going on. The major features of this are that it gives you a 90-day average of your blood sugars. To the left, you can see my averages through the day for the last 90 days. Uh, you can also see your best days in range. You can make comparisons of different time ranges. And they also have what they refer to as an ambulatory glucose profile. But we'll examine that a little more closely in a moment. Here's an example of my 90-day report. You can see how I'm often staying in range and get an idea of times when I'm out of range. It looks like I'm well controlled at night, but evening is when I have the most variability and moments of hyperglycemia. I'm a late night snacker, excuse me, so that kind of follows my patterns of behavior. Here we can see my best day out of the last 90 on November 12th. Uh, Often I'll look at these days with my provider. Unfortunately, I usually can't recall the specifics of that day from weeks in the past. Uh, I do run and cycle frequently, so I anticipated I'd worked out that day. Pulled up my fitness app and I can see that I did go in a long run that day. And typically on days like that, I can plan an appropriate diet before and after runs. But unfortunately, that's not something I'm going to do every day. But it is important to note that seeing better days when I'm doing aerobic activities. Here we can compare the last 90 days to the 90 days prior to that. There's very little change in my case. I wasn't using the Clarity app for that previous 90 days, so I guess I didn't have a real reason to make any improvements. But outside of that, I had increased my nighttime basal rates, and you'll notice between the two graphs, there's less variability in the most recent 90 days, and I would attribute it to that. Uh, we'll discuss some of the further observations here in just a bit, and how those affect my goals as a diabetic. But next, let's look at the ambulatory glucose profile. This is probably the most useful part of the data analysis. It paints the bigger picture of glucose averages, and there's a few pieces of data we need to look at in particular I've highlighted on the screen. Uh, Firstly, on the left, we can see my time in range. I spend about 80% of my time in range, very few hypoglycemic events, and a certain amount of time, about 20% above the range I want to be in. Uh, we can also kind of see the amount of variability I have. by the width of these ranges you can see on the graph. Now, if we look at the right, we can see my average glucose, 149, and that kind of translates to the GMI below that, which is 6.9%. The GMI is the glucose management index. That is what they use as an estimated A1C. Caracas et al. Had compared the AGPs of Dexcom Clarity and seven other CGM analysis tools. Their key takeaways were that hyperglycemia seemed to be exaggerated compared to point-of-care tests, and that may be what contributes to the pattern of inaccurate A1C predictions that had occurred amongst all of these tools. They also made a point that these analyses are proprietary, so we can't see their algorithm or how they work or how they make these calculations to pull this data. Uh, Anecdotally, my A1C was not accurate with this as well. My A1C is on the right there on the down low. I was 6.1, so almost an entire percentage different compared to Clarity, which does kind of fit in line with what Caracas et al. Had to say. Maybe my hyperglycemias are exaggerated on Dexcom, but that's only an inference we can make because we can't see their algorithm. So what were my goals and how did I meet them? My major goal with using Clarity was to observe trends that would allow me to make changes that could help me improve my A1C. My goal is good long-term management. Quite honestly, despite looking at this data, I probably won't make any significant changes. I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. I may make some minor changes. One might be to increase my basal rate of insulin from 6 p.m. to midnight. Maybe that could mitigate the elevated sugars I have when my appetite's higher. Uh, but importantly, Clarity allowed me to make this observation and come up with a plan to make that change. So I would say this is a useful application, whether I use it or not. Quite frankly, it was more than easy to use. I could access the data within minutes and quickly come up with ideas such as adjusting my basal rate. However, I don't think this is easy for anyone. I'm an educated nurse and I have a strong grasp of what this data means and how I can implement plans to make these improvements. The average patient may not be able to make those inferences without the help of an endocrinologist, and we'll address that. Lafell et al. Had observed that when youth and young adults start using CGMs, they see drastic improvements in their A1Cs compared to just doing intermittent capillary blood glucose tests. Pratley et al. Had also used a similar method and observed that CGMs decreased occurrences of hypoglycemia in adults. Clarity is a data analysis tool that takes improvements that go a step further than that. They allow patients to make observations about the trends of these hyperglycemia and trends of the hypoglycemic occurrences. So when are they happening and what can we do about it? Rather than making just little improvements, you're able to attach meaning to the events by understanding when they happen. I think it's imperative that patients use tools like these to observe trends, and that will allow them to make improvements, but they absolutely should not consider it an alternative to meeting with an endocrinologist or checking their A1Cs. It's a helpful tool, but it can't replace professional medical consultation. I would recommend patients use tools like Clarity, but its value is contingent on patient health literacy, understanding of diabetic management principles, and a collaborative engagement with a healthcare provider. In 2021, Axrick et al. Had made observations similar to mine. Analysis tools like Dexcom Clarity provide real benefits to patients, but those benefits depend on their level of engagement and how well they understand the data they're looking at. So where do we go from here? There's clearly room for improvements. The biggest barrier is patient education. There's very little information within the app about what these numbers and trends represent. If I wasn't an educated nurse and long-term diabetic, I don't feel I could confidently make the same inferences that I've suggested through this presentation. I do think there's the potential for AI-driven data interpretation. AI could interpret the data and make suggestions for managing care, but that creates liabilities that these companies are not likely willing to accept. However, they could be useful for providers in rural areas where endocrinologists are not available. AI can make suggestions that providers might use as a stepping stone to make suggestions. Uh, these could include insulin regimen adjustments, like adjusting basal rates. If they're having highs at night, maybe they need an increased basal rate at night. Um, AGP accuracy needs to be improved. Crackus et al. Had looked at Clarity and 7 other analysis tools, and every single one of them ran higher than what real A1Cs would get. Uh, so there are faults in the algorithms they use. Um, if they made their algorithm open source, I think it would allow providers to suggest alterations to their algorithm that could make it more accurate. But because it's a proprietary tool, I don't think that will happen. Akturk et al. Had made an observation I'd not considered either. There's nothing available that makes this tool more user-friendly for the visually impaired. For example, patients with diabetic retinopathy who could clearly benefit from tools like this may not even be able to use it with ease. However, they can still get the data to share with their provider. In conclusion, excuse me. In conclusion, Dexcom Clarity represents a significant advancement in patient-centered diabetes management by transforming complex glucose data into actionable insights. Uh, by transforming complex glucose data into actionable insights, it empowers patients to take a more proactive role in their healthcare journey. However, as a for-profit technology, its continued evolution will depend on balancing innovation with commercial considerations. Uh, there is room for improvement still. If you have questions, please reach out, and thank you for your attention.